Commander Lyra Voss stood at the observation deck of the Galactic Council's diplomatic vessel, her ice-blue eyes scanning the approaching human ship. Her crystalline skin, a natural armor of her species, reflected the starlight in sharp, cold patterns. The Kryn were known throughout the galaxy for two things: their inability to feel emotions and their devastating efficiency in warfare. Lyra embodied both traits perfectly. "Commander, the human vessel is requesting permission to dock," her lieutenant announced, his voice as monotone as her own. "Grant permission. Maintain Security Protocol 7, she replied, her hand instinctively moving to the plasma blade at her hip. The humans were an enigma. Unlike every other species in the Galactic Council, they had refused to surrender when the Kryn fleet arrived at their borders 50 years ago. Instead, they had done something unprecedented. They had invited the Kryn to talk, to negotiate, to understand each other. The very concepts were foreign to Lyra's people, who knew only conquest and submission. As the airlock hissed open, Lyra prepared herself for another tedious diplomatic meeting. The Council had assigned her to this post as punishment for a failed military campaign, forcing her to endure endless conversations about mutual understanding and peaceful coexistence. Such concepts were inefficient, illogical, weak. The human who stepped through the airlock was unlike the politicians and diplomats she had grown accustomed to. He wore simple clothes rather than ceremonial robes, and his brown eyes held something she couldn't identify. Captain Marcus Chen extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting, which Lyra ignored. "Commander Voss, I'm Captain Chen. I'm here representing the Human Colonial Medical Corps," he said, lowering his hand without any visible sign of offense. "State your purpose," Lyra responded curtly. Marcus smiled, an expression that meant nothing to her. "I'm here to request passage through Kryn space to deliver medical supplies to the Outer Rim colonies. There's been an outbreak of Andromedan fever." "Request denied. Kryn space is restricted to Alliance vessels only," she stated automatically. "Commander, there are 3 million colonists in those systems. Without these supplies, half of them will die within the month," Marcus said, his voice carrying an urgency she found puzzling. "Natural selection ensures the survival of the strongest. Death of the weak improves the species," Lyra recited the fundamental principle of Kryn philosophy. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. "You really believe that? Belief is irrelevant. It is fact. What if I told you that one of those colonies has a Kryn population? 3,000 of your people who settled there after the war." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. Kryn do not settle. We conquer or we leave." Marcus pulled out a datapad and showed her the colony manifest. There, listed among the humans, Altarians, and dozen other species, were indeed Kryn names. Not just any Kryn, but members of the Lost Battalion, warriors who had disappeared during the First Contact War and were presumed dead. "They chose to stay," Marcus explained. "They found something there worth protecting." "Kryn do not choose. Kryn obey," Lyra said, but her voice carried less certainty. "Would you like to see the video messages they sent?" Before she could refuse, Marcus activated the hologram. A Kryn warrior appeared, but something was different about him. His crystalline skin seemed softer somehow, less sharp, and his eyes. There was something in them she had never seen in her own kind. "My name is Varric Thorn, formerly of the 7th Assault Legion," the hologram spoke. "I am sending this message to any Kryn who may receive it. I want you to know that we have found something here. The humans call it community, family. I do not fully understand it yet, but I know that I would defend this colony with my life, not because I am ordered to, but because I choose to." The hologram shifted to show Varric standing with a group of colonists, multiple species working together to build what appeared to be a school. Children ran between them playing some form of game. Some were human, some were Altarian, and some were Kryn. Young Kryn laughing. The sound was so alien that Lyra's hand moved to her weapon instinctively. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Kryn cannot what? Feel joy? Form attachments? Care about others?" Marcus asked gently. "Commander, your people aren't emotionless. They're suppressed. There's a difference." "You know nothing of the Kryn," Lyra snapped, her composure cracking slightly. "I know that every Kryn warrior I've met maintains their weapons with obsessive care. That's not logic, that's pride. I know that Kryn formations never leave wounded behind, even when it would be tactically advantageous. That's not strategy, that's loyalty. And I know that right now, you're struggling with the idea that some of your people chose a different path. That's not computation, Commander. That's feeling." Lyra turned away from him, facing the stars. Her reflection in the viewport showed her rigid posture, her perfect military bearing. But for the first time in her life, she wondered if that reflection showed who she truly was, or merely what she had been shaped to be. "The medical supplies," she said finally. "Show me the manifest." Marcus handed her the data pad. The list was extensive. Antibiotics, viral suppressants, emergency surgical equipment, water purification systems. Resources that could save lives. Weak lives, according to Kryn doctrine. Valuable lives according to something else, something she had no name for. 3 million beings, Marcus said quietly. 3,000 of them Kryn who chose connection over conquest. They're all counting on someone to care enough to help. "Caring is weakness," Lyra recited automatically. "Is it? Or is choosing not to care when you have the power to help the real weakness?" The question hung in the air between them. Lyra had commanded fleets, had conquered systems, had never lost a battle until her last campaign. But this human, with his simple clothes and earnest eyes, was defeating her with nothing more than words and images of Kryn children laughing. "I will consider your request," she said finally. "You may remain on the station while I deliberate. Thank you, Commander." "Do not thank me. I have decided nothing." As Marcus left her office, Lyra called up the colony data on her personal terminal. She told herself she was merely conducting tactical analysis, gathering intelligence on a potential weakness in Kryn territory. But as she watched more videos from the colony, saw Kryn working alongside other species, saw them celebrating festivals, mourning losses, building lives instead of ending them, something deep inside her crystalline chest began to crack. Her lieutenant entered without announcement, as was Kryn custom. "Commander, shall I escort the human to quarters?" "Yes," she replied without looking away from the screen. On it, a Kryn female was teaching a mixed group of children, including young Kryn, how to tend to a garden. The sight should have disgusted her. Instead, she found herself wondering what those plants smelled like, what the soil felt like between fingers, what it meant to nurture something simply for the joy of watching it grow. "Commander, are you well? Your skin temperature has increased by 0.3 degrees. "I am functioning within normal parameters," she lied. Nothing about what she was feeling was normal. Nothing about this human's visit was normal. And perhaps a treacherous part of her mind whispered, normal was not something to be maintained but overcome. That night, Lyra stood again at the observation deck, but this time she was not alone. Captain Chen had joined her, somehow knowing she would be there. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the stars. "My people have a saying," Marcus finally spoke. "The longest journey begins with a single step." The Kryn have a different saying. "The first step off the path leads to the abyss." Maybe. Or maybe it leads to something better than the path ever could. Lyra considered this. Her entire life had been the path. Training, combat, command, conquest. An endless cycle that had brought her people power, but never satisfaction. Victory, but never peace. She thought of Varric Thorn in the video, surrounded by beings who chose to be near him, not from fear, but from something else, something that had no word in the Kryn language. "Your medical supplies," she said suddenly. "I will approve passage through Kryn space." Marcus turned to her, surprise evident on his face. "What changed your mind?" "Nothing changed my mind. I am merely exploring alternative tactical options." "Of course," Marcus said, and she could hear something in his voice that might have been amusement, another concept foreign to her people. "There is one condition," she continued. "I will accompany your vessel. Commander, to ensure the safety of the supplies, naturally, and to gather intelligence on this colony that claims to harbor Kryn citizens." "Naturally," Marcus agreed. "We leave at 0800 tomorrow." As he turned to go, Lyra spoke again. "Captain Chen, the thing that Varric Thorn found at the colony, this community he spoke of, is it difficult to understand?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time, Lyra found herself wanting to understand what that expression truly meant. "The most worthwhile things usually are, Commander. But that's what makes them worth the effort." After he left, Lyra remained at the viewport for hours, watching the stars and wondering if perhaps the abyss her people feared was not falling, but flying. Tomorrow, she would take that first step off the path. Tonight, she allowed herself to feel something her people had no word for, but which other species called hope. The crystalline armor around her heart, built through decades of conditioning and combat, showed its first crack. It was microscopic, barely perceptible, but like all cracks, it would grow. And through it, something new might enter, something warm, something human. In her quarters, she accessed her personal log and spoke words that would have been treasonous on her homeworld. "I want to understand." The stars offered no judgment, only infinite possibilities. And for a Kryn warrior who had known only one way of being, possibility itself was a revolution. The journey through Kryn space aboard the human medical vessel Mercy's Dawn was unlike any mission Lyra had undertaken. She had commanded warships with crews of thousands, orchestrated invasions with surgical precision, but sitting in the modest medical bay, watching Captain Marcus Chen prepare vaccines, left her feeling strangely unmoored. "You're staring," Marcus noted without looking up from his work, carefully measuring doses into individual containers. "I am observing," Lyra corrected. "Your process is inefficient. An automated system could complete this task in 1/10 the time." "True," Marcus agreed, continuing his methodical work. "But then I wouldn't know each dose was perfect. These are for children, Commander." "Every 1/10 of a milliliter matters. Precision can be programmed into machines. Care can't be." There was that word again. Care. It seemed to permeate everything humans did, an invisible force that guided their actions in ways Lyra couldn't quantify. She watched as Marcus labeled each vial by hand, adding the intended recipient's name when he knew it. "Why do you add names? The numerical designation is sufficient for distribution." Marcus paused, holding up a vial marked Tara, age 7. "Because Tara isn't a number. She's a little girl who loves to draw pictures of stars and is scared of needles. When the colony medic sees her name, they'll remember to let her hold her mother's hand and maybe distract her with a story." This emotional attachment to individuals weakens the efficiency of the overall operation. "Does it?" Marcus set down his work and turned to face her fully. "Commander, can I show you something?" Before she could refuse, he led her to another section of the medical bay. Inside a stasis unit lay a young Altarian child, his blue-scaled skin pale with illness. "This is Kevik. We picked him up from a disabled transport 3 days ago. Last stage of Andromedan fever. By all rights, he should be dead, but my team has been taking shifts, monitoring him around the clock, adjusting his treatment every hour based on his responses. Standard medical protocol would have written him off. But we don't follow standard protocol when it comes to children. We follow hope. Lyra studied the child's readings on the monitor. The mathematical probability of survival was minimal. Any Kryn medical unit would have already reallocated resources to more viable patients. Your emotional investment clouds your judgment. Resources spent on low-probability cases reduce overall survival rates. Maybe fighting for every life, especially the ones statistics say we should abandon, is what makes us human. I am not human. No, Marcus smiled sadly. But those 3,000 Kryn at the colony chose to be something more than what they were programmed to be. Maybe that's why you're really here. Lyra's hand clenched involuntarily. I am here to ensure safe passage of medical supplies. Through space you control completely. With your reputation, a simple transmission would have guaranteed our safety. No, Commander, you're here because those videos of laughing Kryn children did something to you, cracked something open. You presume too much, human. Do I? Then why did you spend 3 hours last night reviewing the colony's cultural integration reports? Why did you access 17 different files on human-Kryn cooperation initiatives? Lyra's crystalline skin flushed slightly, a response she had never experienced before. You monitored my access? The ship's AI logs all database queries. I didn't look until this morning, when I found you here at 0500 hours watching my team work. You're searching for something, Commander. I think you're searching for permission to feel. The words hit her like plasma fire. Permission to feel. As if emotion was something granted rather than suppressed, chosen rather than forbidden. The concept was so alien to Kryn conditioning that she had no framework to process it. A soft alarm chimed, and Marcus immediately returned to the stasis unit. Kevik's vitals were fluctuating. Without hesitation, Marcus began adjusting the treatment parameters, his hands moving with practiced efficiency that Lyra had to admit matched any combat medic she had seen. Come on, little warrior, Marcus murmured to the unconscious child. Don't give up on me now. The child cannot hear you, Lyra pointed out. Maybe not, but I need to say it anyway. He glanced at her. Haven't you ever needed to say something, even if logic told you it was pointless? Lyra thought of her last battle, the one that had led to her diplomatic exile. She had stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching her fleet burn, and had whispered words no Kryn should speak. I'm sorry. Sorry to her crews for leading them to defeat. Sorry to the enemy civilians caught in the crossfire. Sorry to herself for feeling the weight of every life lost. Yes, she admitted quietly. I have. Marcus stabilized Kevik's condition and stepped back, exhaustion evident in his posture. He'll make it through the night. Tomorrow we'll know more. You require rest. Your efficiency is compromised. Probably, but I'll sleep better knowing I did everything I could. Even if it proves insufficient? Especially then. Over the following days, Lyra found herself drawn repeatedly to the medical bay. She told herself she was studying human methods for tactical purposes, but that explanation grew thinner each time she helped Marcus prepare treatments or found herself checking on Kevik's progress. On the 4th day, something extraordinary happened. She was alone in the bay when Kevik's eyes fluttered open. The child looked around in confusion, his gaze settling on Lyra's imposing figure. By all rights, he should have been terrified. Kryn were the monsters in countless species' nightmares, their crystalline forms and cold efficiency the stuff of horror stories. But Kevik reached out a small, scaled hand toward her. Pretty, he whispered, pointing at the way the medical bay lights refracted through her crystalline skin. Lyra stood frozen, unsure how to respond. No one had ever called her pretty, efficient, deadly, precise. These were the adjectives applied to Kryn warriors. But pretty? You should rest, she said stiffly. Stay? The child asked, his hand still outstretched. Logic dictated she should leave. There was no tactical value in comforting a sick child. but something else. Something that had been growing since she first saw those videos of the colony made her slowly extend her hand to meet his. The child's scales were warm against her cool crystal skin. He smiled and closed his eyes, falling back into healing sleep, but maintaining his grip on her finger. Lyra stood there, afraid to move, afraid to break this fragile connection she didn't understand. That's how Marcus found her an hour later, still standing beside the stasis unit, her hand held by a sleeping child. He would not release me, she said, her voice lacking its usual authority. Did you try to pull away? She hadn't. She realized with a start that she hadn't even wanted to. His grip is stronger than anticipated. Marcus moved quietly around the bay, checking readings and preparing the next round of treatments. You know, on Earth we have stories about ice queens whose hearts are melted by acts of simple kindness. Kryn hearts do not melt. Our cardiovascular system operates on thermoelectric principles that— It's a metaphor, Commander. I am aware. She paused. I do not understand metaphors. Sure you do. You just call them tactical analogies. He finished his preparations and came to stand beside her. How does it feel? How does what feel? Being needed by someone who sees you as more than a weapon or a threat. Being seen as something beautiful. Lyra looked down at the child, still holding her finger. I do not know. I have no reference point for comparison. Then maybe it's time to create one. That night, as they continued toward the colony, Lyra found herself in the ship's observation lounge with several of the medical team. They had invited her to join them for what they called downtime, another concept foreign to Kryn society. She had accepted out of curiosity and found herself listening to stories of past missions, successful treatments, and lost patients. The hardest part, said Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the team's senior physician, is when you can't save someone. Logic says you did everything possible, but your heart doesn't care about logic. Then why subject yourself to such inefficient emotional responses? Lyra asked. Because the joy when you do save someone outweighs all the pain, Yuki replied. Like when we treated the Vraxian colony last year. The mortality projections were 70%. We lost 12 people, saved 300, and every one of those 300 lives was worth the heartbreak of the 12. Kryn mathematics would focus on the 12% failure rate. Human mathematics focuses on the 300 families still intact, Marcus interjected. Different kinds of math for different kinds of people. We are approaching the colony, the ship's AI announced. Arrival in approximately 6 hours. The medical team began discussing distribution plans, but Lyra found herself distracted by a sudden, unfamiliar sensation. Anxiety. Not about potential combat or mission failure, but about what she might find at the colony. Would the Kryn there truly be as changed as the videos suggested? And if they were, what did that mean for her? Marcus seemed to sense her unease. Would you like to review the colony layout with me? It might help to know what to expect. She nodded, grateful for the distraction. They moved to a smaller briefing room where Marcus pulled up holographic displays of the colony. It was larger than she had expected, with distinct neighborhoods where different species clustered, but also communal areas where all mingled freely. Here, Marcus pointed to a section near the colony center. This is where most of the Kryn families settled, close to the school and the community gardens. Families. The word felt strange on her tongue. Kryn do not have families. We have genetic contributors and training cohorts. These Kryn do. Look. He zoomed in on one dwelling. Varek Thorn, the one from the video, lives here with his partner Ilara. She's Altarian, and their adopted children. Kryn cannot reproduce with other species. No, but they can love them. They can choose to raise children together, build lives together, face the universe together. Love. Another word with no Kryn equivalent. Lyra had looked it up in the ship's database and found thousands of definitions, none of which fully captured what she observed in the humans around her. Why? She asked suddenly. Why do humans persist in forming these bonds when they inevitably lead to loss and pain? Marcus leaned back, considering. My grandmother used to say that humans are like stars. We burn brightest when we burn together. Alone, we're just points of light in the darkness. Together, we become constellations. More metaphors. More truth than you might think. He pulled up another display, this one showing interconnected nodes representing the colony's social structure. Every person here is connected to dozens of others through bonds of friendship, love, shared purpose. When the fever hit, those bonds became support networks, people taking care of each other's children, sharing resources, providing emotional support. Your people's philosophy says the weak die and the strong survive. But here, the connected survive and isolation is the only true weakness. Lyra studied the web of connections, seeing patterns her tactical mind could appreciate. Redundancy, mutual support, distributed resources. It was actually quite efficient in its own way. Show me more about Varric Thorn, she requested. Marcus pulled up the former warrior's file. The transformation was documented in images spanning 5 years. The early photos showed a typical Kryn warrior. Rigid posture, sharp crystalline edges, cold eyes. But as the timeline progressed, something changed. His crystal skin seemed to soften, taking on an almost luminous quality. His posture relaxed, and his eyes, there was warmth there. What happened to him? According to his own writings, he fell in love. First with Ilara, then with the idea of a life beyond conquest. He started teaching combat techniques to colonists for self-defense, found he enjoyed being a protector instead of an aggressor. When orphaned children started showing up at the colony, refugees from various conflicts, he and Ilara began taking them in. And the other Kryn accepted this? Not at first. There was resistance, even some violence. But gradually, as they saw Varric's contentment, as they experienced kindness from other species, as they discovered they could be valued for more than their military prowess, things changed. The colony's Kryn are blacksmiths, teachers, farmers, artists now. They're still formidable. No one's foolish enough to threaten the colony. But they've found purpose beyond destruction. Artists. Kryn artists. The concept was so paradoxical that Lyra's mind struggled to process it. Show me their work. Marcus pulled up a gallery of images, sculptures that somehow captured motion in crystal, paintings that used refracted light to create impossible colors, music that blended the mathematical precision of Kryn thought with the emotional expression of other species. One piece in particular caught her attention. A crystal sculpture of 2 hands reaching for each other, one clearly Kryn, the other human. Where they nearly touched, the crystal had been worked so finely that light passing through created a rainbow bridge between them. Who created this? Lexia Vore, former demolitions expert. She says the precision needed for her new work isn't so different from her old job, except now she creates instead of destroys. Lyra found herself reaching toward the hologram before catching herself. I would like to meet her, to understand her tactical transition. Marcus smiled. Of course. I'm sure she'd be happy to discuss her tactical transition with you. A soft chime indicated incoming communication. Dr. Tanaka appeared on the screen. Captain Commander, you should come to medical. Kevik is asking for the pretty crystal lady. Lyra felt that strange flush again. The child is delirious. The child is healing, Yuki corrected gently. And he's been drawing pictures of you all day. Would you like to see? Despite herself, Lyra found herself saying yes. Minutes later, she stood in the medical bay looking at childish drawings rendered in bright colors. There she was, recognizable despite the crude technique, but transformed through a child's eyes into something magical. In his drawings, her crystalline skin wasn't cold and sharp, but full of rainbows. She stood tall but not threatening, a guardian figure watching over smaller figures labeled me and other sick kids. "He wants to know if you'll be there when he goes home," Marcus said. "He's worried his parents won't believe he made friends with a Kryn warrior." Friends. Was that what they were? This child who held her hand and drew pictures of her, was he her friend? The concept had no place in Kryn psychology, and yet... "I will accompany him to ensure proper family reunification," she said formally. Kevik beamed at her from the bed, and Lyra felt something inside her chest that definitely wasn't thermoelectric circulation. It was warm and unfamiliar and not entirely unpleasant. As the Mercy's dawn approached the colony, Lyra stood once more at an observation port. But this time, she wasn't alone. The medical team had gathered to get their first look at their destination, and somehow she had been incorporated into their group without conscious decision. The colony spread below them, a patchwork of different architectural styles blending together in unexpected harmony. She could see the Kryn section Marcus had shown her, but also how it connected seamlessly to the rest of the settlement. Gardens and parks created green veins throughout the structure. Children played in open spaces while adults of various species worked together. "It's beautiful," someone murmured. "It's impossible," Lyra said quietly. "Everything I was taught says this cannot exist. Different species cannot truly cooperate. The strong dominate the weak. Order comes from hierarchy, not collaboration." "And yet, there it is," Marcus said, standing beside her. 3,000 of your people who chose a different truth. What if they're right? The question escaped before she could stop it. What if everything the Kryn believe is wrong? Not wrong, incomplete. Like knowing how to fight, but not why some things are worth fighting for. Like understanding victory, but not what comes after. Like being able to conquer, but not to create. The ship began its descent, and Lyra felt her anxiety spike again. In a few hours, she would meet these transformed Kryn. She would see for herself if the videos were truth or propaganda. She would have to decide whether to report this colony as a threat to Kryn orthodoxy or what. She didn't know. For the first time in her life, Commander Lyra Voss, victor of 100 battles, faced a situation her training hadn't prepared her for. She was about to encounter her own people living as something beyond warriors, and the possibility simultaneously terrified and thrilled her. "Whatever happens down there," Marcus said as if reading her thoughts, "remember that you always have a choice. Your people chose. You can too." Choice. Such a simple word for such a revolutionary concept. As the colony grew larger in the viewport, as she prepared to take the next step on this journey away from everything she had known, Lyra wondered if perhaps the humans were right about something else. Perhaps the longest journey really did begin with a single step. And perhaps she had already taken it the moment she approved passage for a medical ship carrying hope to those who needed it. The crystalline armor around her heart showed new cracks, spreading like a web of possibility. Through them, warmth continued to seep in, foreign but no longer unwelcome. Whatever awaited her on the colony below, she knew with sudden certainty that she would never be quite the same Kryn who had stood on a diplomatic station considering whether to let 3 million beings die for the crime of weakness. That Kryn was already becoming someone else. Someone who held children's hands and wondered about art and considered that perhaps strength meant more than the ability to destroy. The transformation was far from complete, but like the child Kevik fighting his fever, she had turned a corner. The prognosis, as the humans might say, was hopeful. The colony's landing pad was crowded with beings of every description, all gathered to welcome the medical ship. As Lyra descended the ramp beside Marcus, carrying medical supplies, she scanned the crowd with tactical precision. Humans, Altarians, Vraxians, a dozen other species. And there, her breath caught. Kryn. They looked different. Not physically, their crystalline forms still caught and refracted the light, but something in how they stood, how they moved, how they existed in space had changed. Where Kryn warriors stood in rigid formation, these Kryn stood in loose groups, some with arms around companions of other species, others lifting children to their shoulders for a better view. A figure separated from the crowd and approached. Lyra recognized him from the videos, Varric Thorn. In person, the change was even more pronounced. His crystalline edges had indeed softened, and when he smiled, his entire being seemed to radiate warmth. "Commander Voss," he said, offering his hand in the human style. "I am Varric Thorn. Welcome to Haven Colony." Lyra stared at the offered hand. A gesture that would have been unthinkable between Kryn warriors. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was firm, but not challenging, warm where hers was cool. "You know who I am," she stated. "Your reputation precedes you. The victor of Kelnis Prime, the sword of the 7th Fleet." His smile didn't waver. But reputations only tell us who someone was, not who they're becoming. The fact that you're here, helping deliver medical supplies instead of demanding tribute, suggests your story is changing. "I am here on a fact-finding mission," she said stiffly, withdrawing her hand. "Of course you are," Varric replied, and she heard no mockery in his tone, only understanding. "Would you like to help us distribute the supplies first, or would you prefer to begin your investigation immediately?" Before she could answer, a small figure burst from the crowd and ran toward them. A Kryn child, no more than 6 years old, with crystalline skin that sparkled with excitement. "Papa Varric? Are these the medicine people? Is my friend Tomas going to be okay now?" Varric scooped the child up effortlessly. "Yes, Liza. These are the people who brought medicine for everyone who's sick." He turned to Lyra. "Commander, this is my daughter Liza. We named her after an old Kryn word for light." The child studied Lyra with curious eyes. "You're Kryn like me and Papa, but you feel different, sad different." "Kryn do not feel sad," Lyra said automatically. "That's silly," Liza replied with the devastating honesty of children. "Everyone feels sad sometimes. Papa was sad when Mama Ilara's garden got sick. But then we all helped fix it and he was happy again." Lyra found herself at a loss for words. This child, this Kryn child, spoke of emotions as naturally as breathing. How was such a thing possible? "Why don't you help us?" Liza continued. "Helping makes the sad go away." Marcus stepped forward. "That's a wonderful idea. Commander Voss is very good at helping. She helped us get here safely." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Despite her intentions to remain an observer, Lyra found herself drawn into the distribution effort. The colony's organization impressed her tactical mind, species working together, each contributing their unique strengths. Humans provided coordination and emotional support. Altarians used their natural telepathic abilities to identify those most in need. Vraxians contributed their strength for heavy lifting. And the Kryn were everywhere, integrated seamlessly into every aspect of the operation. She watched a Kryn medic working alongside a human doctor, their movements synchronized through practice rather than programmed hierarchy. She saw Kryn teachers keeping frightened children calm with stories while they waited for treatment. She observed Kryn engineers who had modified their combat training to create innovative medical equipment. "Strange to see, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. She turned to find a Kryn female, her crystalline form showing the soft luminescence she was beginning to associate with the colony, Kryn. "I am Lexia Vor," the female continued. "Varric said you wished to meet me." The artist. the former demolitions expert who now created beauty instead of destruction. Your work with crystal sculpture. I want to understand how you made such a transition. Lexia's laugh was like wind chimes, another impossibility for a Kryn throat to produce. Walk with me. This is not a conversation for standing still. They moved through the colony, passing the distribution centers where medicine was being dispensed with careful efficiency. Lexia led her to a workshop filled with crystal sculptures in various stages of completion. For 40 years, I destroyed, Lexia said, running her hand over a partially formed piece. I was very good at it. I could calculate the exact pressure points to shatter any structure, any defense. I took pride in my precision. She paused. Do you know what pride feels like, Commander? Pride is satisfaction in achievement, Lyra replied carefully. No, that's the definition. I asked if you know what it feels like. Lexia picked up her tools. Watch. She began working the crystal, her movements precise, yet flowing. The same hands that had once set charges to destroy cities now coaxed beauty from raw material. As Lyra watched, a form began to emerge, two figures embracing, species indeterminate, united in connection. Pride, Lexia said as she worked, feels like warmth in your chest when you see something you created. It feels like the smile you can't suppress when someone sees your work and understands. It feels like the knowledge that you've added beauty to the universe instead of subtracting it. You speak of feelings as if they're real, tangible things. Aren't they? When you saved that human child during the Kelnis evacuation, what did you feel? Lyra went rigid. That information is classified. Not here. Here we know the stories they don't tell. How the terrible Commander Voss broke protocol to evacuate human civilians. How she risked her career to save children who weren't even her species. What did you feel? It was tactically sound to preserve civilian resources. Liar. Lexia said it gently, without accusation. You felt what we all feel when we choose compassion over protocol. You felt human. I am not human. No, but humanity isn't a species, it's a choice. The humans taught us that. They showed us that strength could mean protecting instead of conquering. That victory could mean everyone surviving instead of enemies falling. She set down her tools and faced Lyra directly. They showed us that we could choose to be more than weapons. A commotion outside interrupted them. They emerged to find a crowd gathering around the medical center. Inside, Lyra could see Marcus and his team working frantically around several patients. What happened? She demanded of the nearest colonist. Mining accident in Section 7. 15 injured, 3 critical. Without conscious thought, Lyra pushed through the crowd. Her combat medical training, usually reserved for keeping warriors functional for battle, kicked in. She assessed the scene instantly. Overwhelmed medical staff, critical patients deteriorating, needed supplies scattered. You, she pointed at Avraxian, establish triage station outside. Walking wounded there. You, to an Altarian, use your telepathy to monitor pain levels and alert medical staff to changes. You, to a group of humans, form supply chains from the ship. People moved to obey without question, responding to the authority in her voice. But this wasn't the cold command of conquest. This was leadership with purpose. Commander, Marcus called out, relief evident, I need another pair of hands here. She moved to his side, where a human miner lay unconscious, crushed legs testament to the accident's severity. Tell me what you need. For the next 3 hours, she worked beside the medical team. Her Kryn precision, usually devoted to targeting vital points for destruction, now focused on saving lives. When human emotion threatened to overwhelm the staff as patients coded, her calm became an anchor. When despair crept in as they lost one patient, her determination rallied them to save the rest. It wasn't until much later, as the last patient was stabilized, that she realized what had happened. She stood in the medical center, covered in various species blood, surrounded by exhausted but grateful staff, and felt complete. For the first time in her life, her skills had built instead of broken, saved instead of slaughtered. "You were amazing," a young human nurse said, tears streaming down her face. "We couldn't have done it without you." "I performed necessary functions," Lyra replied, but the words felt hollow even to her. "No," Marcus said, appearing at her elbow. He looked exhausted but satisfied. "You did more than that. You cared." That word again. But this time Lyra couldn't deny it. She had cared. When that miner had flatlined, she had felt something tear inside her. When they had brought him back, she had felt something soar. These weren't thermoelectric responses or tactical calculations. They were feelings. "I need air," she said suddenly. Outside, the colony's sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors. She found herself on a hill overlooking the settlement, trying to process the fundamental shift occurring within her. The cracks in her crystalline armor hadn't just grown, entire sections were falling away. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" Varek's voice came from behind her. He settled beside her on the hill, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in their own skin. "The first time you realize everything you believed was incomplete. How do you stand it?" she asked. "The uncertainty, the vulnerability, the constant assault of emotions?" "The same way we stood battle, one moment at a time, but with better rewards." He gestured to the colony below where lights were beginning to twinkle on. "I have a family now. Not a breeding assignment or a training cohort, but beings I chose who chose me back. I have friends who would die for me, not because they're ordered to, but because they care about me. I have a purpose beyond conquest. And if the Kryn Empire comes, if they decide this colony is an aberration to be cleansed, then we'll fight. All of us together. Human determination, Altarian coordination, Vraxian strength, and Kryn precision. We've run scenarios. A traditional Kryn attack would fail because they can't conceive of what we've become." He looked at her directly. "Just as you couldn't until today. I should report this. It's my duty to inform the Empire of this situation. Yes, you should, but you won't. You seem very certain." "I am. Because I recognize the look in your eyes. It's the same look I had when I first held Ilara's hand and realized that touch didn't have to be violence. The same look when I first made someone laugh instead of scream. The same look when I understood that I could choose my own path." Lyra said nothing, staring at the lights below. Families were gathering for evening meals. Children were playing in the streets. Life was being lived in all its messy, inefficient, beautiful complexity. "There's something else you should see," Varek said, "if you're willing." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He led her back into the colony, through winding streets to a modest building. Inside, she could hear multiple voices, laughter and music, the sounds of community. They entered to find a gathering in progress. 30 or 40 beings of various species, including a dozen Kryn, sat in a rough circle. In the center, a human woman was telling a story, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. Children sat enraptured, including several young Kryn who gasped and giggled at the appropriate moments. "Story night," Varek explained quietly. "Every week, someone shares a tale from their culture. Tonight is Maria's turn." They found seats at the edge of the circle. The story was simple. A human fairy tale about a lonely mountain that learned to be a home for creatures seeking shelter. But as Lyra watched the faces around her, she saw how the story became a bridge between species. When Maria finished, an Altarian child raised a tentacle. "In our stories, mountains sing. Can this mountain sing? What a wonderful idea, Maria replied. How do you think it would sound? What followed was a collaborative reimagining of the tale, each species adding elements from their own traditions. The Kryn children contributed ideas about crystal formations that could create music. The Vraxians suggested underground rivers that would provide rhythm. By the end, the simple human story had become something richer, something shared. This is how we build bridges, Varric whispered to her. One story, one shared meal, one helping hand at a time. An elderly human man took the center next, but instead of a fairy tale, he began to speak of his own story, how he had lost his family in a Kryn raid decades ago, how hatred had consumed him, how he had come to the colony seeking revenge on the Kryn settlers. His voice shook as he described the moment when a Kryn child, lost and crying, had run to him for help simply because he was an adult who might make things better. I looked at this child, this Kryn child who was supposed to be my enemy, and I saw only a frightened little one who needed comfort. In that moment, all my hatred shattered like glass. How could I hate a species when one of their children trusted me to keep them safe? The man's eyes found Lyra across the circle. I've learned that hatred is heavy armor. It protects you, yes, but it also imprisons you. When you let it go, when you choose to see the being instead of the species, the individual instead of the enemy, that's when you truly become free. The gathering continued late into the night. Stories were shared, songs were sung, food was passed around. Lyra found herself included without question, offered food by humans, engaged in conversation by Altarians, even challenged to a friendly competition of precision by a young Kryn who wanted to show off their crystal-shaping skills. When she finally left, her mind was spinning. Everything she had witnessed challenged the fundamental assumptions of Kryn society. These people weren't weak because they cared for each other. They were stronger. They weren't chaotic because they lacked rigid hierarchy. They were harmonious. They weren't inefficient because they valued individual lives. They were thriving. Marcus found her standing once again at the observation hill, but this time she wasn't alone with her thoughts. Kevik, the Altarian child from the ship, had been discharged and was clinging to her hand, chattering excitedly about everything he had seen in the colony. And there are gardens everywhere, and children can play, and nobody yells about efficiency. And my new friend Thomas says that Kryn kids are the best at crystal light tag, and can you teach me to be good at crystal light tag, even though I don't have crystals? I am not familiar with this game, Lyra admitted. We'll teach you, a voice called out. Liza, Varric's daughter, ran up with a group of mixed-species children. Everyone can play crystal light tag. You just need to be fast and smart and know how to work together. Before Lyra could protest, she was surrounded by children explaining rules, demonstrating moves, and insisting she join their game. She looked to Marcus for help, but he was smiling. I believe you're being recruited, Commander. What followed was the most undignified hour of her military career. She, Commander Lyra Voss, played a children's game. She ran and dodged and even laughed when Kevik managed to tag her by predicting her tactical maneuver. When the game finally ended, she was breathing hard, her crystalline skin glowing with exertion and feeling inexplicably light. You're getting better, Liza announced. Your tactical stuff is good, but you need to learn to be more unpredictable. Logic doesn't always win games. Or wars, Marcus added quietly. That night, in the quarters the colony had provided, Lyra sat down to write her report. 3 times she began, and 3 times she deleted everything. How could she explain what she had seen? How could she make the Empire understand that these Kryn hadn't fallen? They had risen. How could she convey in military terminology the strategic advantage of joy? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Varric and Alara, the Altarian artist who was his partner. We thought you might like some company, Alara said, her melodious voice carrying warmth. First nights in the colony can be overwhelming for Kryn visitors. There have been others. A few. Scouts mostly. Some left immediately. Some stayed a few days. One, Varric smiled. One is now our head of agricultural development. They sat together, an impossible grouping by Kryn standards. Varric poured tea, another human custom the colony had adopted, and they talked. Not about tactics or efficiency or military strength, but about dreams, hopes, and the courage it took to change. The hardest part, Varric said, was accepting that feeling didn't make me weak. My whole life I had been taught that emotion was a flaw to be suppressed. But when I first felt love, real love, not just biological imperative, it was like seeing color after a lifetime of grayscale. How did you know? Lyra asked. How did you know it was love? Ilara answered, her tentacles swaying gently. He knew because he chose my happiness over his own advantage. In the beginning, being with me cost him status among the Kryn here, but he said my smile was worth more than their approval. That's highly illogical. The best things usually are, Varric replied. They talked until dawn, and when they finally left, Lyra felt as though she had been given pieces to a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. The report still glowed on her screen, unfinished, but now she knew why. She couldn't write it because she was no longer the same person who had begun it. The next morning brought a crisis, a communication from the Kryn Empire, demanding an update on her fact-finding mission. She stood in the colony's communications center, aware that her next words would determine not just her future, but potentially the fate of everyone here. Marcus stood beside her, solid and supportive. Whatever you decide, we're with you. Your optimal scenario is that I lie to my people. My optimal scenario is that you tell your truth, whatever that is. She opened the channel, and the cold visage of General Crix appeared. Her former commander, the embodiment of traditional Kryn values. Commander Voss, report. General, I have reached the colony and conducted a thorough investigation. And this was the moment. She could give him what he expected, reports of weakness to be exploited, corruption to be purged, an excuse to bring the might of the Empire down on this small experiment in coexistence. Or, the colony poses no threat to the Empire, she said. The Kryn here have adapted to local conditions in a way that maximizes survival probability. They have found a sustainable equilibrium with other species that reduces conflict and increases resource efficiency. Adapted? The general's eyes narrowed. Explain. They have developed new social structures that leverage interspecies cooperation. Their defensive capabilities remain formidable. Any attack on the colony would face unified resistance from multiple species with complementary abilities. Strategically, they are more valuable as they are. You speak like a diplomat, not a warrior. I speak as someone who has observed successful adaptation to changing circumstances. Is that not what the Kryn have always done? Evolved to meet challenges? The general was silent for a long moment. Your report will be reviewed. Maintain position and await further orders. The screen went dark. Lyra released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. You didn't lie, Marcus observed, but you didn't tell the whole truth either. I told the truth that matters to the Empire. They understand strength and adaptation. They don't understand... She gestured helplessly at the colony around them. This. Not yet, but maybe someday. He paused. So what now? You're supposed to maintain position. Yes. She looked at him, then at the colony beyond the windows. Children were playing in the morning sun. The medical team was conducting follow-up visits. Life was continuing in all its beautiful complexity. I suppose I should find quarters for an extended stay. Marcus smiled. I know just the place. There's a house near the Crystal Gardens. The previous occupant left to start a new settlement. It's been waiting for someone who might appreciate the way morning light plays through crystal formations. That sounds acceptable. As they walked through the colony, Lyra felt the last of her crystalline armor crack and fall away. Beneath it was not the weakness she had always feared, but something stronger and more flexible, something that could bend without breaking, that could feel without failing, that could choose connection over conquest. Kevik ran past with a group of friends, pausing just long enough to wave at his pretty crystal lady. Liza called out an invitation to evening story time. Lexia nodded from her workshop, hands creating beauty from sharp edges. And everywhere the impossible made real. Species living together, choosing together, building together. The transformation was complete, though the journey had just begun. Commander Lyra Voss, warrior of the Kryn Empire, had discovered something more powerful than any weapon in her arsenal. She had discovered the strength that came from allowing others to matter, the tactical advantage of compassion, the strategic value of hope. Her heart, no longer frozen in crystalline perfection, beat with new purpose. And if sometimes that purpose led her to play children's games or hold the hands of sick patients or stand in wonder at a sculpture that captured connection in crystal, well, perhaps that too was a form of victory. The colony had shown her that ice could melt without the structure beneath collapsing, that warmth could strengthen rather than weaken, that a Kryn warrior could become something more without losing what made her formidable. As the sun set on her first day as a resident rather than an investigator, Lyra stood in the crystal gardens Marcus had mentioned. The formations caught the dying light and transformed it into something magical, each facet reflecting possibility. She thought of her report to the Empire, carefully crafted truth that protected while not quite lying. She thought of the life she had left behind, rigid and certain and cold, and she thought of the life stretching before her, uncertain and warm and filled with connections she was only beginning to understand. A hand slipped into hers, Kevik again apparently appointed as her unofficial guide to emotional expression. "Are you happy?" he asked with the directness of children. Lyra considered the question seriously. Happy, another word that had been absent from Kryn vocabulary, but as she stood in the garden surrounded by beauty, connected to this small being who had chosen to trust her, aware of the community that had somehow claimed her as their own. Yes, she was happy. "I am learning to be," she told him truthfully. "That's good," Kevik decided. "Learning is important. Tomas says even crystals keep growing if you let them. Even crystals keep growing." The child's simple wisdom contained more truth than 1,000 military treatises. Lyra squeezed his small hand gently, careful of her strength, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Empire would want more reports. Her transformation would be tested by old habits and trained responses. But tonight, she stood in a garden of living crystal with a child's hand in hers, surrounded by proof that enemies could become family, that warriors could become protectors, that the frozen could thaw and still stand strong. The stars emerged overhead, each one a sun-warming world she couldn't see. Somewhere among them was the cold certainty of the Kryn Empire. But here, on this small colony that had chosen its own way, warmth had won. Connection had conquered isolation. Hope had melted fear. And Commander Lyra Voss, who had once believed that strength meant standing alone, discovered that the greatest courage lay in allowing others to reach her frozen heart and fill it with their light. The transformation was complete, the ice was melted, and what emerged was not weakness, but a new kind of warrior entirely. One who fought for connection instead of conquest. One who measured victory in lives saved rather than enemies fallen. One who had learned that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't the ability to destroy, but the choice to create, to care, to change. The human had been right. She had warmed her frozen heart, and in doing so, she had found not just hope, but home.